Well, I wrote my first book in my mid-20s, Diet for a Small Planet. Having been a community organizer in the war on poverty in the United States, I really wanted to dig more deeply, like why all of this suffering amid what I was already seeing as plenty, but I had an intuition that food would be the thread that I could pull and begin to unravel economics and politics. And so I sat in the UC Berkeley Library and literally kind of put two and two together and realized that, oh my gosh, while the newspaper headlines were telling us, oh, we're running out of food, we're hitting the limits. No, there was more than enough then for all of us to eat well, and even more true today. So I wanted to tell the world, hey folks, we can't blame stingy nature. We have to look at what are the systems we're creating that are blocking people from eating. And so that book came out in 1971, and certainly by the early 80s, I was saying hunger is not caused by a scarcity of food, it is caused by scarcity of democracy. I love that soundbite. But what does it mean? And so the rest of my life in some ways has been devoted to, okay, what does that mean and what practically can I do to help realize a democracy strong enough, vital enough, conscious enough, exciting enough to end hunger? And I'm still at it. Mm-hmm. So I think that right now my purpose in life, I've never felt more alive, in terms of my passion for my mission. Because things have gotten so much worse in so many ways, and yet I see so much possibility for the first time. So both of those are firing me up. And I'm trying to articulate for people, I understand this election campaign for president has been a nightmare. I mean, I hate to turn on the radio because it's one more depressing encounter after another. The coarseness, the lack of any focus on the real issues we have to confront as a people is so depressing. And yet, I understand why people are so angry that they would vote for someone totally unqualified. Mm-hmm. Because you feel like, I just want to throw it all up and, I just don't want business as usual. Mm-hmm. And I get that. So my purpose is to explain better, explain better how we got here, so that we see that it's not just about throwing it all up, it's about working for real democracy. So how did we get here? In my view, there was I'm not a conspiratorialist, but a very concerted, in some cases coordinated, campaign starting back in the 70s in particular, after the war on poverty, that was so exciting, where I felt like we were really moving forward, and we actually reduced the poverty rate in this country almost in half in a little more than a decade. I felt part of that. Yeah, we can do this. Then by the 70s, and into the 80s with Ronald Reagan, very deliberate, as often Reagan is quoted as the problem that, government is not the solution, it is the problem. And that we best leave solutions to the magical marketplace. And the notion that there is some magic, you don't want to look behind the curtain, okay, what's going on? So we were breathing this ether, just let the market do its thing. Not understanding that it's not any kind of market, it is a market driven essentially by one rule. That is, decisions are made what brings highest return to existing wealth. So wealth accrues to wealth, until we've reached, in the United States today, the almost unfathomable state where 20 people control as much wealth as the bottom half of the American people. That cannot work. Of course that's going to create angry voters who just want to blow the thing up, right? Yeah. I get it. So how do we identify the consequences of that concentrated wealth and its effect on our political system? Because unfortunately, for a very long time, money has played a huge role in American politics. There was an interesting study that came out a few years ago by two political economists who looked at a lot of data over the 80s and the 90s, even before the 2000s, when it's gotten so much worse. Just the 80s and 90s found that the average American, there was virtually zero correlation between what we think and what policies were enacted. Whereas the elite interests, there was a very high correlation. In other words, Americans who are angry today are correct in their intuition that their voices are not being heard. And so we've reached this point now, the presidential election, it's estimated to just the presidential, not the state local, this year it's estimated to be almost $7 billion, or it will be $7 billion. And most of that is coming from a tiny percent of the American people. And so people get that. Even if they don't know the numbers, they get it. And there's a very interesting way also, a lot of that money, where does it go? It goes to pay for advertising. So then our communications industry is itself, has a self-interest in this funding system, because now on average about 20% of local budgets of local news TV comes from advertisements that they are carrying for candidates. And it can go as high in some locales as 35% of their income for these local TV stations coming from political advertising. So there's definitely a common interest in keeping the status quo there. So how do we change this? Because this cannot work. We can't address poverty, we can't address climate change or any of the biggest problems facing us without real democratic reform in which the citizens are heard. And so the most exciting thing in my life now, and what I'm now working on a book on this, what I'm about to describe, a democracy movement of movements emerging in this country that is still invisible to most people, but I'm working with a young millennial, Adam Eichen, and we are preparing a book to describe this, that we met in April when we both participated in a march from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., and this march was for money out of politics and for the protection of voting rights, and beginning to change, to make sure that our Constitution, our Supreme Court supports a reasonable way of funding our elections that doesn't disempower most of us. So marching, we found to be transformative. We ended up on the Capitol steps, and we held the largest civil disobedience on the Capitol steps ever in American history. And most people do not know about it. About 1,400 of us were arrested. But let me just focus on the change that was made, because, I've been saying this about democracy for decades, but something actually changed at a cellular level for me. It was like I got it in my bones that what democracy can feel like, and nobody can ever take that away from me. And I think it is this being part of a movement that is critical, and that's why we want our book to draw more and more people in. What happened to me? Well, as we were approaching the Capitol, as I first saw the dome come into sight, it was a moment we were chanting, "Whose democracy? Our democracy. Whose democracy? Our democracy." And I started weeping because I could feel it. Yes, I'm an owner. I'm not just a protester, a spectator, a complainer. I am a co-responsible. And guess what? I'm here with solutions all ready to go, and that have been tested and proven elsewhere. And I'm one of the grown-ups in the room. Hey, I'm not just a kid out there, or I don't use that. I mean, we're not just an outsider out there, right? So that was part of the realization. And then as Adam and I talked about the other changes that happened for us, that we identified two more of these internal shifts that we think of as the essence of living democracy that really we live and breathe, that engages us in economic life as well as in political, etc. So there are two other. The other one is that we discovered as we marched and talked to people we would never meet otherwise. I don't, for example, have the opportunity to talk to veterans very much. Well, I did on this march, and I heard their story, why they cared so much about democracy. And I talked to a lawyer from California, a Republican I would never have met otherwise. And to discover there are people who are outside of your normal circles, who share this passion to have a real voice in democracy, something just changed in me. And again, I did not feel alone anymore. I didn't feel like some crazy outsider. That because people different from me also got it. Very empowering. And the third feature we call civil courage, a term I love. I've heard for the first time in Leipzig, Germany, actually, about civil courage that they demonstrated to bring down the Berlin Wall. And civil courage is different from bravery. Civil courage is the capacity to walk with fear into the unknown and to recognize fear as energy. It's not just a stop sign for you, and to keep going and then to see those changes happen. I discovered that when I marched to Washington and participated in the sit-in, that it was something in my brain changed again. It was like, oh, if you did this that you were afraid of, then maybe you can do something else that you didn't think you could do. So civil courage is this capacity to walk with fear and continue to understand that we must do that which we thought we could not do. And that sense of confidence and excitement about personal growth. So suddenly, democracy was no longer, the spinach you have to eat to get your yummy dessert of personal freedoms. It wasn't this dull duty that, oh, well, we got to do. Suddenly, democracy became the thrill. And the thrill of democracy is embodied in those three internal changes, the social bonding, the sense of ownership, and then this sense of transforming fear into courage, and what that then can spell out in every aspect of our lives. So that's what we want to communicate, is a movement that is actually the biggest adventure of our lives, and with people that we would never know otherwise. So that march, even though it didn't get a lot of coverage, it's continued, the Democracy Spring that organizes is continuing on. Democracy Spring, after we got to Washington, it was met with another large group called Democracy Awakening, which in part of Democracy Awakening, again, this coalition of groups, the beauty of it is these are all folks who have their own issue identity. Say, mine has been hunger, it still is. I just finished a book on world hunger last year. But as one great leader in this movement told me, Josh Silver of Represent Us, he said, Frankie, he said, you can love 2 children at once. And I said, yes, I've got 2 kids. I can do this. So you can love your issue passion and you can love your democracy passion. And so now there's an organization, Democracy Initiative, which actually got underway in 2013, that involves now almost 60 organizations representing 30 million Americans. These represent groups from the Sierra Club and Greenpeace and Labor, NAACP, a whole range of organizations. None of them are giving up their issue passions, right, but they all recognize that without democracy, none of these issues can really progress. Maybe incrementally a little bit, but not really take us where we have to go. So for them, as I've often said for a long time, democracy is the mother of all issues. And that it was just thrilling to me, because when I came up for air, so to speak, after my last book on world hunger, I said, oh, I don't have to start this. This is, who was I? It's happening, but it's just not visible yet. And that's why I'm excited to be alive. And that's why I can look my granddaughters in the face and say, hey, your Grammy's doing what she can. And I'm delighted to be working with a millennial so that we have more than one generation articulating these. So Adam Eichen and I are really right in sync on this project of a book to help bring democracy to life in America.